Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. Today, we're going to be talking about strategic leadership, management theory, CEO leadership development, and achieving business success and happiness. My guest today is Don Schmincke, author of the best-selling book, The Code of Executive. Don's been featured in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, and is an award-winning speaker, researcher, founder of the Sega Leadership Institute, and has delivered over 1,700 speeches. Don, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Did I get that bio all right, or did I mess anything up?
That sounds pretty good.
Okay. You do have a very memorable name. You know, I'm sure you've been told that before. It's the first I've ever seen of its kind.
Great. Growing up, it was horrible because like the teachers couldn't pronounce it, and it didn't translate into English really well. But then as I got in the social media age came about, it was like, wow, this is cool. It's like the only name on Google.
Right. Yeah.
So
really,
like Don, it's like if I was like David Smith, it'd be like a million hits. It's like, well, which one's you?
It wasn't difficult to establish your thought leadership with that name. But really, you know, your name is a name that I've heard for maybe going back 15 or 20 years. So you've obviously established some thought leadership. You've been around the Vistage CEO peer group circles. You've spoken before, I'm sure, a ton of those groups. Let's start off with the question was, how does an MIT planetary physicist end up training CEOs?
Yeah, it was kind of a weird journey. I was involved in the different categories of studies at MIT, and one was planetary physics, but then I did my thesis automating the Harvard MIT biomedical lab, and I started getting interested in humans. So it became my favorite species to study.
Okay.
And one thing led to another. I ended up going to Hopkins, and I was studying human grouping behaviors, and I was fascinated about that. That, of course, leads you to looking at business leadership, because that's how human groupings express themselves in a corporate environment. And what was interesting is I got attached to the executive MBA program there, and so I did my graduate work, but started teaching there, which was interesting. And I just a lot of students were complaining about management theory implementation. You know, there have all these best-selling books out there, but you know, most bankrupt companies have shelves full of best-selling books. You know, so
right?
Something's missing, and a lot of them hired, you know, the big ones hired the authors of the best-selling books, and they still went bankrupt. So I was curious as to why there was, you know, as a scientist, why there wasn't a good correlation between management theory and implementation success. So that's what started it, and I ended up just putting together various scientific intersections to understand and do a lot of autopsies. And so that's what happened. I started teaching this. I was asked to start teaching CEO groups. And so I ended up, I guess I train about 700 CEOs a year now. And it's been fun, and I'm always learning something and always doing some expedition somewhere to discover something new. And like that, that's how I got here.
You sound almost more of an anthropologist than a physicist. So it's an interesting blend, it seems.
Yeah. And I hung out with some really brilliant anthropologists, and I learned a lot of it. I'm just hanging around with smarter people than me, and they were able to teach me a lot. So I'm kind of like an amateur Indiana Jones wannabe is what people have called me. Indiana Jones. I'm like, I'm not that good, but
right.
I do like discovering things in remote regions of the world.
Oh, so you like to travel, I take it then, yes?
It depends. I mean, traveling is what I'm doing all the time anyway, just from doing speeches. So working with companies, because all over the place. So I'm on a plane. I'm hitting maybe 2 or 3 cities a week, but the expeditions are more around just planting myself somewhere and doing some filming and interviewing of, various tribes or cultures to see what's going on.
Super interesting. So it really teaches you the dynamics of, behavior around teams, around cooperation, collaboration, competition, but in completely different settings than business settings. So
yeah.
Do you find there's a strong correlation in the human behavior from, one tribe to a corporate office?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why we were able to grow companies faster, because we go into these 90% failure rates of management theory, totally turn it around, and then evolve the strategy, the structure, the culture, and the management team. And the output was the sales. Well, depending on what the CEO wanted. And a lot of times we would triple or sometimes 10 times the sales of a company within a few years. That happened using the same techniques that we're using to increase organizational performance. But what was going on is these techniques were very similar to what I was learning in these various tribes or even ancient civilization studies that I was doing. So it's a heavy correlation, because I found out that most leadership is genetic. The instincts are genetic. How our brains have evolved and formed is all part of an evolutionary construct. So when you start applying that, your ability to implement management theory goes up just phenomenally, because you're now dealing with humans at that level. It's not like theory of the month, or
right.
My boss just read a new book. I can't wait. What's going to happen tomorrow? It's totally different.
But I have to ask you, when you say genetic, it almost sounds like you believe that leaders are born, not made. And
yes.
Which is what we've always said. That's not the case, right? Salespeople are made, not born. Leaders are made, not born. I mean, I do believe that there are natural born, I guess, sellers, influencers, natural born leaders, but so much of it has to be learned. No? Trained?
No, I think, in fact, it was interesting. I had an argument with the former dean of the Army War College, because I was doing some work, some Gettysburg simulations for executive teams, really a fun project. And he was like, no, we create leaders here at the War College. And I said, well, okay, how many people have you graduated over the past, 5 or 10 years? These are, so many thousands have gone through this. I said, great. How many of them ended up being great leaders? And he totally went stone cold. It was like, oh, I said, that's my point. Same thing with sales. I mean, you could put 100 people through the same sales class.
Yeah.
How many become great salespeople?
No, it's probably a fraction, right?
Yeah. So that's when we began to realize that, you need skills. You needed to develop, processes and understandings of how things work. But the leadership, I find it's more of you're born with it more than taught, only because that's why, like I said, the same class produces different results. But why those few people? And when we got to look at those few people, they were already being leaders.
Well, it's interesting. As you're speaking, I'm looking back at a company that's most famous, I think, for its leadership development. One I'm sure you know all too well, and that's General Electric under Jack Welch's leadership. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the number of Fortune 500, maybe Fortune 100 CEOs that graduated from a VP or president position at GE and went on to become a Fortune 500 CEO is pretty staggering. And it makes you wonder, so was it just in the selection and recruitment process that they brought the right people in, and then those people built the number one business in that industry, and then they went off and started another company, or were plucked off to run another company? And so that fits with your thinking. It makes sense.
Yeah, and you see the same thing in military, which we've learned a lot from observing them. You put people in situations and you watch who is leading. You watch who's emerging, and those are the ones that you tend to promote, and they get higher and higher leadership positions. And I think the same thing in major companies where people are promoted is there's something that's not to say that sometimes you get an idiot that gets promoted beyond their capacity.
Right.
But in general, a good CEO won't promote someone just out of tenureship or it's a nice guy or whatever. But, it's like that man or woman needs to be able to show some element of leadership that people will follow them. And they'll be able to make the kind of decisions and exhibit the behaviors that you're looking for that position. And a lot of times that's missed. And I go into companies and they made bad promotion decisions, because they didn't look.
Well, so it's interesting. I want to go back to the concept of training, and I'm going to contrast that with coaching. It's always been my belief that training doesn't really work, and that training without coaching is because what's the difference is that coaching is ongoing reinforcement of behaviors that need to be learned or learned differently and practiced, versus training is oftentimes like just a shot in the arm, and then the trainer goes away and the student, the CEO or the leader goes back to doing their old behaviors. So, what's your thought on that as a concept? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree? Yeah,
we did a lot of stuff when I was at MIT and I was teaching at Hopkins. There was a lot of cohort models being developed like 20 years ago, and the retention and application rates went up phenomenally. So some of this is now being used in business training. And what we have, like during COVID, I took my Samurai program for teaching executives how to lead at a deeper level using the work that we did with Oxford University, because they had this ancient manuscript that I ended up publishing or reinterpreting for management. But it's what we found was best is I would have a 7-minute video. It's an online course. So it for 7 or 8 weeks is everybody gets a video, and they log in, they see me. I'm introducing a concept. They have some homework, some things they have to go to their manager with to help apply. And then there's a weekly cohort for an hour. By that meaning group coaching.
Right.
So everybody comes together. We limit it to 10 at a time. And the results are much more effective. So if they just took the course, which they could do, and at the end, then they know how to be a samurai leader. But the application just is much richer when there's a coaching element to it. And when you put them into a cohort system, like a group coaching, it's even more dynamic because they're playing off each other and they're exploring different things together. And as then the role you take is more like a professor in a case study auditorium where you're engaging, you're asking questions, and they're applying what they learn. So I think it's you're right. I think coaching coupled with training is a better output.
Yeah, and I think I've always recommended to my clients that can afford it that they should have a coach, someone like myself, and as well being a CEO or some type of a peer group. Could be an industry peer group, could be one like the Vistage model. And that is essentially a cohort model where group coaching is what's going on to some degree with a chair. I think the combination of the both, because I don't feel that a lot of times in a cohort, people are willing to go maybe as deep with one another. And so the group in a cohort is only as good as the chair can get everyone to go really deep and to the person who's probably the least vulnerable in the group, getting them more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had some chairs use the Samurai program to go deeper faster, only because the cohort, if it's based on a course on fear, as an example,
Mm-hmm.
like where are your innermost fears that are stopping you, or later on, what must die in your life to get you to the next level? I mean, these are the kind of questions which is an ancient journey that's been taken by executives for centuries. And so by having that as a good foundation, plus with the medical research we put into it as well, so it's like yes, this has worked for millennia, but here's why. In other words, here's the exercise we're going to do. Here's why it works, because medically we now know what's going on in the brain. So now your turn. And we put them through some exercises. So when they go from there into a cohort, they're prepared. You know what I mean? It's easier to drill down and start opening up these sometimes uncomfortable, but sometimes very exciting journeys. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, well, you changed my life, or,
Wow.
Saved my marriage, or maybe I needed to end my marriage and I was resisting or something. But it's pivotal, life-changing experiences that just comes out of a leadership program. It's really amazing. I'm always surprised when I hear these stories.
So, Don, tell us about some of the research that either you're currently doing on leadership that you're really excited about, or maybe just some of the most influential research, the research that really has been a game changer for the most people and that you think everyone should know about.
Well, the models that we've been developing, I have this 3-hour workshop, and I do a lot of CEO groups through it. In fact, I'm going to do 3 this week in various cities, is a model that's been developed over the past 20 years. And it really is based on avoiding tool seduction and what really drives performance in companies. Because we went in, and as we started seeing these companies that were failing, or they were faltering, and they invested tons of money in the latest best-selling books, they hired the latest thought leaders and this, that, and the other thing, nothing was happening. So we went to look at those autopsies and discovered that we're spending a lot of time on tools. But I remember when we did our last book called High Altitude Leadership, I did it with Chris Warner. And high altitude leadership was an interesting experiment because we did it live. We wrote it live while Chris, who I had met previously climbing in the Andes on an expedition project, he was doing K2 for NBC. So we actually did the book live while he's on K2, which is the Death Mountain. That is the mountain that kills the most climbers.
Right.
And it was there as he was, pulling bodies off dead throughout his career. And of course, on K2, they found a number of bodies or body parts. They were all clutching their tools, you see. And I began to realize that most dead companies are clutching its tools as well. So we went to look what is the seduction around tools, and it's the human instinct for safety, because if we have control of the world, we're safer. So tools help us do that. Analysis helps us do that. The only problem is it causes the failure rate of most management theories. So if you go onto Google or send any scholarly database and you do a search for management theory failure rates, you're going to get millions of hits. And generally, most management theory fails 70 to 90% of the time. It's a pretty serious failure rate at 90%.
Yes.
But we found why. It's because we approach it like a tool, and the tool starts using us versus us using it. And that's the difference. So we started getting away from the tool issue and started looking at how human decision occurs when you alter a human's belief system. So for the past 20, 30 years, we've been looking at those techniques for altering human belief. And that seems to be what great CEOs have been doing for thousands of years. And by doing it, sales go up, performance improves in a company, and it's pretty rapidly. And the success rate is over 90% versus a failure rate. So that's a basic platform now. But what's next for me? I'm really getting excited by looking at the brain for entrepreneurship. And so the book that hopefully we'll be launching in a few months is really looking at how it's sort of like a guide for entrepreneurs. And it's very politically incorrect because it gets back to your earlier question, which is a great question. Is it trainable or is it natural? And the more that we've gotten into it, we found that it's natural. In other words, you're either born to be an entrepreneur It doesn't mean you couldn't get some training to learn how to do it better. And it doesn't mean that somebody who's not an entrepreneur or born to be one can't learn something from taking courses in it. But successful entrepreneurs seem to have not only a natural tendency for it, but actually a brain design for it. So it's a pretty controversial book, but I had fun putting it together because I'm talking with some brilliant people. I mean, the people that for some reason want to hang out with me are, and I learned so much from them. Like, George Stalk, who started the lean manufacturing revolution, and he's now into disruption. And his latest Harvard Business Review article is opening that. So, we spent some time every few weeks on Zooming together. And then Cy Wakeman, who's written some brilliant books on reality-based leadership. I live interacting with Dr. David Buss, who started evolutionary psychology. So I'm surrounded by really brilliant people that help me, get a handle on some of these things. And so when I write these books, it's just a fun thing watching it all come together like that. So entrepreneurship's my next venture.
Entrepreneur, what do you mean?
Well, that's publishing a book on it, and then doing workshops for entrepreneurs, and maybe offering some online courses for entrepreneurs. I think that's a neat field to get into.
Interesting. I wasn't sure what you meant by that comment, because sometimes people have challenged me about, well, what have you done in business? What have been your great successes? Why should I listen to you? And my retort used to be, well, Peter Drucker was arguably the most listened to management expert ever. And the only business he had was his book publishing business, which, he did out of his garage. So I'm sorry. I think that you might be asking the wrong question. But I think this is really, what you're into is really provocative, very far out. And I'm thinking about some of the change makers that I've been exposed to in my life, the Werner Erhards and the Tony Robbins and T. Harv Ekers they're mostly in the personal development, you might say life coaching, personal growth space. And, Tony Robbins is kind of an interesting case study because he is someone who arguably believes that he made himself. I mean, we use that phrase, self-made man, that he's made himself. And I think his whole business model is built on the notion that he can make you too. If you follow what he did, some of which was out there, experimental, maybe a little bit of quackery. In terms of like some of his health diets and thinking, I mean, some of it was good, some of it was a little off, but that you can make yourself into this, and I mean, I have a lot of respect for him actually, because I think he is teaching people the science of state awareness, your mental and emotional and physiological state, and how to alter that to be your best person and show up in the best way. And so it's just interesting stuff. So anyway, you don't have to comment on that, but just wanted to add. So you really come about your work with CEOs and entrepreneurs from a very fresh, very different perspective, and it's because of, I think, it's because of your background and it's the people you're hanging out with. So
it's interesting. I mean, I really suck on the PR end, although my Mark Levy, who's I don't know if you remember Simon Sinek, right?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Well, the guy that started him, in other words, was his coach for discovering the Start With Why concept, which launched him into the stratosphere, is my coach too. So Mark's an incredible brand guy. And so working with him has taught me a lot around how to look at positioning and get better at the PR end. It's funny. I was on a plane. I was sitting next to the former head of NASDAQ, and brilliant guy. And of course, he knows everybody around the world. And I started pulling out these models that I shared with you earlier. And he looks at this thing. He says, this is the freshest, most amazing thing I've seen. He says, how come I've never heard of you?
Right.
My PR sucks. It's like, I've trained 30,000 CEOs, but unless you were one of them, you probably haven't heard of me. So it's funny. I think, and I don't know why, because I'm really just a rogue professor, right? I mean, I love to research and teach, and the research are these extreme expeditions and hanging out with these brilliant people, and then the teaching is publishing, speaking, doing workshops in companies like that. But it's weird being that kind of a professor, because you don't like, okay, who's doing the marketing? I don't know.
Right.
I'm writing books and I'm working.
Well, at least you're working with a coach. And so,
Yeah,
I oftentimes say I focus on 25 to 40-year-olds because I think they're much more coachable than us older folks. I think if you're over 50, 55, you're probably pretty set in your ways and not that coachable, but good for you. I find the same thing. I'm always having to try new things in terms of marketing and push the PR, and good for you that you're doing that, because frankly, if you're a reader of business books, after a while you can get pretty burnt out because there isn't really much new in the business books. And a lot of people will say to me, I wish they could have just put that in 10 pages and I could have gotten the cliff notes out of that.
Yes. Yes. That's so true. I mean,
it is.
Like when I start my speeches off, just I don't mean to interrupt, but one of the things I first start off with is my first 15, 20 minutes is exposing the failure rates, the management theory. But one of those things is to look at how many business books are published every year.
Yes.
And it's 35,000.
Crazy.
New titles, 35,000 new titles every year. And like, they look at me like, what? I says, no one's told you this before, have they? And I says, no. I said, well, I'm telling you. And I said, then we can lead the way down to look at what's going on. I said, I say, you guys publish more than cancer research. I said, but at least we're making progress in cancer research. The issues you're dealing with, I can go back 2,000 years and show you the same exact problem that CEO was dealing with. So all of a sudden it's like mind blowing.
It is mind blowing because I've hung my hat on tools being a game changer for people. And I've often started with a quote from Buckminster Fuller, who I'm sure you're familiar with. He's a systems architect and thinker. And I mean, his concept was give a man a tool, or give a person, I should say, a tool, the use of which will change their thinking and their behavior. And I do believe that's true. I mean, my silver bullet tool, which I've been using since I started coaching in 2004, was basically a variation of the vital few, trivial many, or the 80-20 principle, or the delegate and elevate concept, which is, what do you love? What do you loathe? What can you be the best in the world at, sort of to take on Jim Collins? And how do you focus your time on the things that you're great at and delegate away all the other stuff? That's been a silver bullet tool for me. I find that too many people just don't practice it enough. They don't constantly look at, what is it that that I love to do? What is it that's, my unique ability, Dan Sullivan talks about, or my genius? And how do we get people into their genius or their strength zones? And I say that using the tool, the practice of using it, the discipline of using it more frequently, gets you into thinking about, what's the most valuable use of my time and where do I want to apply it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, I agree. And I've only met Buckminster Fuller a couple of times before he died, and actually dated his niece for a period of time. It's interesting. It's like as I said earlier, tools are great. Tools are cool and we need them. But when they start using us, we're at risk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's why, you can see two companies and maybe they have the same CRM program or ERP program, something going on. One's highly successful using it. The other one goes bankrupt with it. Like, what happened? It was the same tool.
Right. It's not the software, it's the people, right?
Yeah. It's like, are you using it or is it using you? So sometimes I think we have a danger of abdicating leadership, because, we got a tool now, we'll just let that lead us. It's like, that's not the point.
Right.
It's going to be another autopsy for me to study. So stop doing that,
Right.
But the companies that use their tools are, obviously it produces some great result, but they don't get seduced by it.
Yeah, I think I think a great point. So one of the areas that I have found people get really stuck in their business is in the area of communication. You see it in family businesses, you see it in non-family businesses where people have difficulty delivering a difficult communication to another person in their organization. It's what is commonly called as a critical conversation or crucial conversation. And by teaching them the framework of how to have that conversation and giving them that tool, then they can start to practice with more discipline and deliver more effective communications. And so, but I agree, if they get stuck on those tools, then it becomes a very rigid culture, and the structure in the organization is not going to be very effective. But otherwise, but if they're stuck in a communication issue, especially when it's with a sibling or a family member, and it's intertwined with personal relationship stuff or a long-term employee, and there's personal relationship, they have to have something that gives them like a process for how to deliver a clear communication.
And it's interesting because in looking back, we've had maybe 20 to 30% have been of the companies we've transformed have been family businesses, but and the communication can be more of a difficult. It can be difficult anywhere, but with families, it can be magnified, as you know, because you work with family businesses too, and that magnification then becomes more of it all of a sudden isn't about the business anymore. It's about the family issues, which can then sabotage the business. And what we stumbled onto about 20 years ago is that it's easier for any company, but especially family businesses, to have two different strategy sessions. And one is the family strategy session and then the business strategy session, because the family has to come together to look at what does winning mean for us, and it's funny, I use this term, and actually Mark Levy took it to a big conference where he was interviewing, I don't know, it was Apple and Pixar. I mean, went to all these companies to find out what is this definition of strategy. He says, Don, your definition was the buzz of the whole conference. I don't think it was anything genius. I think I just simplified it. Maybe you oversimplified it, but it was like, what does winning mean and how do we do it? It's just that. And when we take like families through this, it's like they never had a thought about that before. They either got, multi-generational things passed down and, but they never sat back to say, what does that mean for us? And once you understand that, it's easier to go into those difficult conversations, because then you can have a strategy session for the company to support that winningness. But then when you have to confront each other, it's on a strategic context of, in order for us to win, we need to do X. And the situation we're having is that supporting that or getting in the way of it. So it becomes less of a personal conversation.
Yeah.
And one on how do we win together. And sometimes we've had situations where some family members had to leave. And it wasn't, it felt personal, of course, but it was like, hey, we don't have a choice. We are here to win. We're not here. The mission statement isn't let's support the ego of family members.
Right.
That's exactly. Not on the website. We're here to support the egos of our family members. So yes, but that's how they operate sometimes, not all, but that's how, it's like, oh, wow, that's what we're doing. That's our real mission, isn't it? It's like, yeah, we have to destroy that or you're ready to die. And it's just the death of that concept.
Families don't talk about what winning looks like in a family dynamic. I mean, maybe they do in the Godfather movies, where like it's very clear what winning looks like and what, what the protocol and behaviors are. But most families don't have that. There's no manual for how to have a winning relationship with your siblings or your parents. I mean,
it was, we just stumbled onto it because we were looking at various cultural alignments and like, the ancient Roman merger and acquisition campaign or migration patterns here. And so we started seeing these issues of an agreement that actually helped deal with some of the most tenuous situations. We started experimenting with family businesses. It started just taking off. And so we've been, using that and building on that since. So yeah, you're right. We don't wake up and think, what are we doing here?
Interesting. So you and I share a passion of like expedition adventure travel. If at least for me, most of it's in book form, like reading John Krakauer books from generation, from climbing Mount Everest or into the wild or whatever. But I think that there's probably an interesting similarity between adventure, expedition, travel, and being a leader of an entrepreneurial venture that is that has the capability of hitting a really big home run, meaning a 3Xer or a 10Xer. Is some of your research involves the similarities between those two areas of discipline or two areas of the life?
Well, in terms of like the expedition application to,
yes.
Yeah, I'm always looking for that, which is kind of cool because the thing that I find, I never know what I'm going to discover, because what I do is I end up in this situation where I'll just pick a part of the world. I don't know why. Maybe there's a collapse of an empire, like when I was snuck into the Soviet bloc, or some rioting or conflict between cultures, some not as dangerous, some more around, I wonder what's going on there. Or I might have read an anthropological study and it was like, so I show up and I just am totally open to anything. And it always takes me to places where it's like, wow, and it's almost like if I thought I knew what I was going to get, I probably wouldn't have went there, or I would have missed it.
Right. Most researchers, I think, go into situations with a hypothesis, and they're going to test the hypothesis. So they're looking. Yeah. There's a arbitrary. What the word I'm looking for is there's a parochial, perspective.
Yeah. And that's I think and I think that stops us from learning. If you think about it, like I like to just parachute in.
Right.
And see what happens. Like I ended up, I was stopping over in Korea. I had my kids when they started getting old enough, I would drag them along on these things. And we were on our way to Vietnam to study some tribes in the Atlas, the mountains there, Dalat Mountain area. But I'm in Korea. I'm thinking, let's look at this. And so we ended up near the DMV, or the demilitarized zone, DMZ there. That was interesting because I wanted to see what was happening at a border of the most high conflict region between North Korea and South Korea. Mm-hmm. And I learned stuff that people weren't even aware of. And when I always ask how many American reporters or politicians have been here, they're like, well, you're the first one that actually has these questions. Wow. But like I have a picture of a subway stop in the DMZ on the South Korean side with Pyongyang, the capital, the destination. And I said, you mean you have a subway that's going to the capital of North Korea? And he said, no, not yet. I said, we just built it. I'm like, what? I mean, they're waiting to put the rest of the subway in. And it was very modern. I was, I have pictures of me and the kids in front of it. But I never know what's going on. Like, when have you ever heard that? No one's ever published this. No one's ever revealed this. So those are the things I love, because I'm able to see not only modern society emerging, but, you get back into these ancient areas, or like in North Africa, I visited a 10,000-year-old tribe. Now, who does that? I mean, but I wanted to study, hey, how do you guys do culture?
Interesting.
Because I have companies, they want to do culture. You guys figured it out for thousands of years, so maybe I can learn something from you. It's like that thing. Wow. I never knew I'm going to be there.
It's very refreshing and different from the mentors that I study from, that are oftentimes looking at the modern corporations and the most successful ones, the unicorns or whomever they are, to figure out, what was the management organization? Did they, was it a traditional command and control? Was it a traditional org chart? Vern Harnish talks about the success of organizations that structure in terms of hives, like little beehives, and there's lots of them. And so I love what you've shared today. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about some of what the work you're doing with your courses. You have a course called Becoming Samurai. Mm-hmm. It's targeted towards CEOs and leadership development. You have one called How to Slay Dragons, targeted towards employees looking to level up their career. Tell us a little bit about what those look like and maybe how people would find out about them?
Oh, sure. Well, my main website that's currently in development, and I'm using Mark Levy to help with this too, is called Saga Leadership, SAGA. We stole that from the Vikings, leadership.com. And so what we want to do, I wanted to sort of scale better because during COVID, I got shoved into my home, as we all did. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And I had people calling saying, I got a lot out of your workshop. Can I want to share it with my people? And so I started learning how to do filming. Actually, I'm in a temporary studio here. But downstairs took a cigar room, I learned how to do filming. I just learned how to I use like a Hollywood editor software, and I put together these courses, which is a lot of fun. And then our clients started using them. And so I want to do more of that. It's a form of teaching when you think about it. I mean, I love teaching, which is, as I mentioned before, publishing or speaking or doing these workshops in companies. But online offers a whole really neat area of getting your research out. And so I'm exploring and experimenting with that next.
Yeah, well, makes a lot of sense. More people probably watch YouTube videos when they do a Google search. And so having yourself and your name optimized so that when people search for it, those videos pop up and there's information about the courses. It's great. Great stuff. So, hey, so we didn't cover two last subjects, ones that are good to end on, talking about achieving business success and happiness. And my most recent guest, actually the week before this episode, is someone who works with Olympic athletes, family businesses, talking about success and helping them to define what success is. Because too many people have a definition of success that probably doesn't work well for them. Not everyone's going to get the biggest house on the hill or have the most money. That it just doesn't work that way. And so if you're defining success by that, yardstick or measuring stick, it's probably the wrong one. So, what are your thoughts on business success or success in general and happiness? And, how do we define it, or, just what are your thoughts on it?
Well, from a business point of view, which is, as I mentioned earlier, I think the best definition I could find is like, what does winning mean? I mean, that is success, because then you're defining the meaning of success. What are the metrics? What does it look like? And because it's different people. I mean, I just left a very large and successful nonprofit in Las Vegas dealing with battered women and what they're doing to support these women, but also the men who are the perpetrators, and what are they, how can they be healed and from whatever is causing this. Fabulous. I mean, just a really inspiring experience. So their definition of winning is different, as opposed to maybe a startup tech company that wants to get an app out there, and have that thing go viral. And that may be different than working with a hospital system or an insurance company or manufacturing, So everybody, I think, has to come to terms with what does winning mean, because that starts everything. Then it starts, okay, how do we do strategy differently? Because most strategic plans fail because they're really tactics. That's what we've found. Most strategic plans fail because they're tactics. So how did you get the tactics? Well, we were analyzing this, did a SWOT analysis, then, and I was like, strategy is not about analysis. I was wrong. I was teaching it that way at Hopkins, but it's really around intuition and how you alter the beliefs that your own and that of industry. And so that's how you see these small startup companies that all the thought leaders and experts and management consultants say they're never going to make it. Never going to make it. They're doing everything wrong. And this company ends up dominating their industry in their lifetime. And I always think that's fascinating, because I want to find out, why were all the experts and thought leaders wrong? What happened? And they were out intuiting something, in the world and in their competition, they just outmaneuvered them. But it wasn't really about analysis. That comes later, tactics is later. So I loved it. When we were working with Black Hawk Down, it was really clear. And working with Black Hawk Down's Matt Eversman, as he says, some general that said you could execute tactically very well, but if your strategy for winning is off, you're gonna lose the war. However, if you have a good strategy for winning, you can make any number of tactical errors. And that's one of the things I'm thinking. In fact, it's going to be in this next book, is we don't teach how to lose. We teach how to win. But when I look at all the winners, they are the history of losing, especially entrepreneurs. You look at these entrepreneurs, everybody says, oh, they're famous and it's successful. It's like, no, look in their history. They learn from each loss. We need to teach losing.
Well, I think maybe for a lot of people, they play not to lose, as opposed to playing to win.
Right.
We tell a story in our public workshops, Scaling Up, years back, where Shaun White, the Olympic winning snowboarder, he played all out in the first Olympics, and he came home, I think, with 3 gold medals. But 4 years later, going up against the Russian snowboarder, I think nicknamed iPod, that he played not to lose. And he came home with 1 bronze, and he was lucky. He just barely got that. And so that's the mindset of playing all out and playing to win is definitely, it's a different mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're looking at maybe teaching winning, but also losing, because we need to teach losing. Who was it? Mandela? I always win. I never lose. I either win or learn. Well, and that's the point. So when I look at Branson and these entrepreneurs that we all admire, their history was not a history of successes. It was a history of mistakes and losses and assumptions that didn't pan out. And what they learned and did around that helped them achieve winning. And that's what we should be teaching, is how to lose powerfully.
Right. That failure is just feedback. And so move on from, learn and move on from it. Yes, interesting concepts. I will argue, though, that a lot of small businesses that are in a maybe Me Too marketplace where I deal with a lot of construction companies, contractors. It's difficult to have a very differentiating value proposition. It's, they struggle with that. And so I teach a lot of them that if you execute on your tactics really well, you can build a very nice, profitable business. And you can, and maybe you're not an entrepreneur, maybe you're a small business person. The difference being that you're not looking to build this to exit and then get onto some other entrepreneurial venture. It's more like you're just looking to find your freedom. John Warlow talks about that type of entrepreneur as being a freedom fighter. They're in it for the long haul, build a really solid company. And, ultimately the freedom will come from other people executing on those same tactics or disciplines. And they don't have great strategies, and it's difficult to even have a strategic conversation. So I just wonder if you think that there's a certain size to a company or a certain trajectory that strategy really matters. And for a lot of the rest of them, it's just like, okay, you don't have a strategy, no big deal. You can still have a profitable business, but you're going to be good, not great.
Yeah. I think it depends, because you can have a small 5-person company. Let's say we just do real estate. So, get a house, put it on the list, sell a house, make money. I know we've been doing that for 50 years. Fine, but you don't really need strategy. Just show up, unless there's a disruptive force,
right?
In which case, good luck with handling that. But I think when you're looking at growth, then that business needs strategy, because you need, like, what does that mean? What does winning mean? How do we grow it? That's because really strategy is about, it's about the death of what was before to create what's next. If you could just do the same thing every day, just do it. You don't need strategy. But if you want to do something different, then something has to change. And change really is death, right?
Yeah, I like that.
I love John Cotter. He said there's a difference between management and leadership. I forget where I read his quote on this, but it was managers are there to create and maintain order.
Yes.
Okay. But leaders are there to destroy what the managers created. To disrupt order, right? because leadership is about change, and there's no reason to change. There's no You don't need leadership and you don't need strategy. Just show up. That's what you got.
Totally agree. I mean, leadership is about getting people from where they are to where they have not been. And, it goes back to the Bible, maybe Moses leading the Jews out of the desert, and sometimes it takes a calling. So, Well, Don, this has been a great 45, 50 minutes chatting with you.
Thank you.
People can find you. What's the best way? Is it at your email, don@sagaleadership.com?
Yeah, Don at sagaleadership.com, or the website is same thing, sagaleadership.com. And I'm going to try to keep piling stuff in there as we get new research going on. And so, but yeah, that's the best way to reach me.
Well, great. So thanks so much for being on the show today, folks. If you enjoyed this show, please like, subscribe, share it with others. Check out Don at his website, some of his trainings, and stay tuned for future episodes of the Disruptive Successor Show.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at the goldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.